We're going to be thinking then about the blessings of Isaac. We're going to be thinking about Genesis chapter 27. But first of all, I want you to come to Genesis 35, just to finish off a thought from yesterday, when we were thinking in Genesis 26 about the sojourning of Isaac. God said in verse 3, you remember Genesis 26 verse 3, sojourn in this land and I will be with thee. And it's something I should have mentioned yesterday and didn't quite. But if you have a look at Genesis 35 and verse 27, right at the very end of Isaac's life, where Jacob, having returned from service under Laban, came unto Isaac his father, unto Mamre, unto the city of Arba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. And if you come and have a look at Genesis 37 and verse 1, we are told that Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger. Revised version, he dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. And so the great characteristic, brothers and sisters, of Isaac's life, following this command from God to sojourn in this land, was that he was a stranger. He was a sojourner, and he picked up on the example of his father and on the command of his God and walked in that way for the rest of his life until he died. And so in Genesis 27 and verse 1 then, it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dimmed so that he could not see, he called Esau, his eldest son, and said unto him, my son. And Esau said unto him, behold, here am I. And we've got a reversal, haven't we? Because in Genesis chapter 22, Isaac says, my father. And Abraham replies to him in the same words as Esau uses, here am I. So now Isaac, brothers and sisters, is the father, and Esau is the son to whom he is addressing himself. But it says that Isaac was old. Now we know, or we can work out, that when it says Isaac was 117 years old at this point in Genesis 27, which makes Esau and Jacob 57, having been born, Genesis 25 tells us, when Isaac was 60. And we can work that out based on the age of Joseph and Jacob when Jacob goes down into Egypt and the length of time Jacob spent with Laban. And it's very, very exciting, and I'll leave you to do that for yourselves. But Isaac was 117 in Genesis 27 when he makes this blessing. And his eyes, we are told, were dim, so that he could not see. And it wasn't as though it was a struggle. It wasn't as though there was a mist. He couldn't see. This phrase, his eyes were dim, it's not a usual phrase. It only comes 4 times. Just come and have a look at Job and chapter 17. Phrase also comes in Deuteronomy 34 and in Zechariah chapter 11. Just for completion. But Job chapter 17 and verse 7 is where the phrase comes, where Job says, mine eye also is dim by reason of sorrow, and all my members are as a shadow. Upright men shall be astonished at this, and the innocent shall stir up himself against the hypocrite. The eyes of Job were dim because of his sorrow, brothers and sisters. And I think it's a reference back to Genesis 27. Or possibly a reference forward, depending on when you put the book of Job. Because Genesis 27 fits into, or comes immediately after, this little phrase in verse 35 of Genesis 26. In verse 34, we're told that Esau was 40, And he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind to Isaac and to Rebekah. 17 years ago, Esau has married these two women. Isaac and Rebekah are grieved because of this. And the next thing we're told is that his eyes were dim. Job says, mine eye also is dim by reason of sorrow. And it's interesting, in Genesis 27 and verse 2, the reason for Isaac offering this blessing in Genesis 27, he says, behold, now I am old. I know not the day of my death. Isaac can feel his mortality. He can feel his age. And he is moving at this point. Back in Job chapter 17, Job says in verse 1, my breath is corrupt, or Revised Version, my spirit is consumed. My days are extinct. The graves are ready for me. So Job, brothers and sisters, can feel his mortality. It was Job who was sure that death was close for him, and ultimately, of course, was blessed and continued. And it's Isaac, brothers and sisters, who feels that death is close to him, despite the fact that in reality he has another 63 years of life to continue in this way. And he calls Esau his eldest son. And it's interesting that this isn't the normal word for elder or for firstborn. So in Genesis 27, when you come down and have a look at verse 19, Jacob says to his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. And that is the usual word. And then again in verse 32, Isaac his father said unto him, who art thou? And he said, I am thy son, thy firstborn, Esau. And it's a different word from this word that is used here, that this word that the Spirit uses, his eldest son. And the word means great or large or big, referring to size rather than age generally. So we have it come up in Deuteronomy 1 and Deuteronomy 9, both of them referring to size. He was great. He was big. And Isaac says, I am old. I know not the day of my death. Have a look at Ecclesiastes in chapter 8, please. Ecclesiastes 8 and verse 6. Because to every purpose there is a time and judgment. Therefore the misery of man is great upon him. For he knoweth not that which shall be. For who can tell him when it shall be? There is no man that hath power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit. Neither hath he power in the day of death, and there is no discharge in that war, neither shall wickedness deliver those that are given to it. And it's exactly the same sentiment, isn't it? Isaac is saying, I don't know when I'm going to die. Ecclesiastes says no one knows the day of their death, and when it comes, there's nothing they can do about it. And the answer, brothers and sisters, in Ecclesiastes is to submit ourselves to the will of God, to give ourselves to his will, to recognize that we can't control these things, that we have no power over them, and that we don't know when they're coming. And so the only answer, brothers and sisters, is to submit to God and to his guidance and to his direction. And I'm going to suggest, brothers and sisters, that we have in Genesis 27 an example of Isaac doing just that. Isaac says in verse 3, Now therefore take, I pray thee, thy weapons, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field and take me venison. The AV margin has hunt me, venison. And the word venison very closely linked to the word for hunting. And it comes again in verse 5. Esau went to the fields to hunt for venison. In verse 7 we've got the word venison. In verse 19 we have the word venison. In verse 30 his brother came in from his hunting. In verse 31, eat of thy son's venison. In verse 33 we have the same phrase as in verse 3. He that hath taken venison, hunted venison. Isaac sends out Esau to hunt for some meat. And make me, he says in verse 4, savoury meat such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Go out and hunt me some food, says Isaac. The savoury meat that I love, and I will bless thee when you return. Why, brothers and sisters? Why did Isaac wish to bless Esau his son, who had been a grief of mind to him now for 17 years possibly, who had shown himself to be unsuitable for any blessing, who had been a subject of a prophecy in Genesis 25. Just come and have a look. Genesis 25 and verse 23. When in verse 22 the children are struggling inside Rebekah, and she says, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And so surely they knew. But I'm going to suggest, brothers and sisters, that word elder, at the end of verse 23, is never anywhere else translated elder. The word means many or multitude or much or great. It's a term of size in terms of number. 100 is bigger than 7, for instance. 100 is greater. 100 is more. And it's that word that is used for elder here. The elder shall serve the younger. And just note that the context is all about nations. 2 nations are in thy womb. 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. 1 people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder, the larger, the greater number shall serve the younger, which means smaller or littler. And so the word, brothers and sisters, is most readily translated in terms of the number of the people, rather than the age of the person within the womb. And so I don't think Genesis 25 verse 23 would have been a guide for Isaac and Rebekah in terms of the blessings that would have been received, the elder serving the younger, etc. I don't think that would have helped them. Because the word elder wouldn't have led them to think the first one to come out. It would have led them to think the one who was greater in size, in number of people. But I think we can get an understanding, a bit of an understanding of Genesis 27 if we ask ourselves a couple of questions. And the first one is, why does Isaac send Esau out to hunt for food, when Rebekah is perfectly able to send Jacob out and say, go and get me a couple of kids from the flock and bring them, and I'll make the savoury meat that your father loves? And he couldn't tell the difference. He didn't know when it was presented to, hang on, this isn't right. This is goat. This isn't what I asked for. Why does Isaac send Esau out to hunt when he'd got the meat just there, within his flocks, that Jacob can just go and pick up? And the answer, brothers and sisters, is in verse 27 of Genesis 27. Having gone through the questions that we're going to go back and think about, Jacob comes near, Jacob in the dress of Esau, comes near and kisses him. And he smelled the smell of his raiment and blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which Yahweh hath blessed. Therefore, God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine." So there was something, brothers and sisters, about the smell of Jacob as he is kissed by Isaac, which leads Isaac to believe that this is the son who should be blessed. And it's the fact, brothers and sisters, that he has already been blessed, hasn't he? In the mind of Isaac, here is Esau before him, who has gone out, who has hunted, who has been given a catch which he has prepared that Isaac might eat. The smell of my son is as the smell of a field which Yahweh hath blessed. And what we've got, brothers and sisters, in Genesis 27 is Isaac desperately trying to validate the blessing which he wants to give to Esau because he loves that son. In much the same way as Abraham, brothers and sisters, when told to send Ishmael away, is distraught that Ishmael might not receive the blessing. In the same way, brothers and sisters, when it becomes clear that Isaac is the child of promise, Abraham is saddened that Ishmael will not live before God. Isaac, brothers and sisters, was desperate for Esau to receive some blessing, was desperate for Esau to turn his life around, was desperate to see evidence of the fact that Esau would worship God as Jacob did. And so he sends Esau out to see if Esau will be blessed by God or not. And that's why verse 28 starts with the therefore. Isaac thinks Esau has already received a blessing from God in the provision which God has given him. And so Isaac feels able then to continue this blessing which he wants to give to Esau, his son. The smell of my son is as the smell of a field which Yahweh hath blessed. Therefore, God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. And it's a natural reaction, isn't it, brothers and sisters? To a child who has gone astray, to a child who has been a grief of mind, to desire for them to come back, to return to the family, to return to the truth. Make me savoury meat such as I love and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Isaac wouldn't have blessed Esau, brothers and sisters, if he hadn't brought the food. Isaac wouldn't have blessed Esau if he hadn't gone out and hunted and provided and brought him the meal. The blessing was there on offer for him if that was the case. And we know, brothers and sisters, Isaac was a man who lived in the presence of God, didn't he? When, back in Genesis 24, if you come and have a look, right at the end of Genesis 24, when Isaac's bride is presented to him, when Rebekah comes, in verse 62 we're told that Isaac came from the way of the well Lahairoi, for he dwelt in the south country. Lahairoi, brothers and sisters, was named back in Genesis chapter 16. In Genesis 16, when Hagar had had enough, and so she went off. But she is stopped in verse 11 by an angel of Yahweh. And in verse 13, she called the name of Yahweh that spake unto her, Thou, God, seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Beer, the well Lahairoi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. Beer Lahairoi, the well Lahairoi means the well of him that liveth and seeth me. And this, brothers and sisters, was where Isaac had chosen to be for 3 years after the death of his mother, in the area of this well, in the presence of God who lived and who could see him. And it was natural, brothers and sisters, for a man who believed he lived in the presence of God to send his son out to see if God would bless him, so that he might then bless his son also. And we know, brothers and sisters, don't we, of the actions of Rebekah in what she does with Jacob to make sure and ensure that it is Jacob who ultimately receives the blessing of his father. And it's an interesting study in a family situation, isn't it? To see the way in which these two clearly hadn't spoken about what was going on here. And so Rebekah feels the need to take some action to put Jacob in the place of Esau. And so the preparations are made. Jacob takes the goat. Jacob is clothed with the skins. Jacob has the meal prepared for him and ultimately takes it to Isaac. And in verse 20, we come to Isaac again, who says to his son, "How is it that thou hast found it so quickly, my son?" And it's a natural reaction, brothers and sisters, but it makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? When you think about the fact that this was the validation. That clearly Esau had been blessed, and Esau had been blessed so quickly that here he was. God had given him a catch. God had helped him in his hunt. And here he was, so soon. How is it that you found it so quickly? And Jacob responds in the way Jacob knows, because Yahweh thy God brought it to me. And again, brothers and sisters, we have confirmation of this idea that there was a recognition of the fact that all was provided by God, that they lived with that understanding. And then when faced with the question, well, how did you get it so quickly? The answer comes back, well, because God gave it to me. This was the answer, brothers and sisters, that Isaac wanted to hear. I think he's a bit confused, because these aren't the words of Esau, who would never have ascribed any of his hunting proficiency to God under normal circumstances, but perhaps here is a change in the son. Perhaps here is a recognition from Esau that this is from God. But there are doubts in Isaac's mind. And so in verse 21, Isaac says to Jacob, "Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not." Fueled, brothers and sisters, by Jacob's faithful reply, which doesn't sound like words that Esau would use, Isaac says, well, just come closer and let me feel you. And so in verse 22, Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Now that word voice, brothers and sisters, means a noise or a sound, but it can also stand for the words that are used. So if you just come and have a quick look at 2 Kings chapter 10. When Jehu is writing letters and sending them to Samaria to the rulers of Jezreel in verse 1. And Jehu in verse 6 wrote a letter the second time to them, saying, "If you be mine, if you're on my side, and if you will hearken unto my voice," same word, take ye the heads of the men, your master's sons. Now clearly it's not the voice here, because it's a letter. It's speaking of the words that are used. And that's the question in Isaac's mind. Well, the words are Jacob's words, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And so Isaac discerned him not in verse 23. The word means to recognize, to acknowledge, or to know. Isaac believed, brothers and sisters, that this was his son Esau, blessed by God. And so moves now to bless him, having shared the meal with him. Verse 25, and Isaac said, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat, that my soul may bless thee. There aren't very many times, brothers and sisters, when souls bless anything. In fact, just come and have a look at Psalm 103. Because in Psalm 103 and Psalm 104, these are the only other two occasions when a soul blesses something. And we know the words very well. Psalm 103 verse 1, bless Yahweh, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless Yahweh, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. Brothers and sisters, we have again a recognition of the fact that God provides, that God gives, that God satisfies our mouth with good things. And this, brothers and sisters, was a character of Isaac, that he recognized that he lived in the presence of God, that what he had was from God, and that what he was now enjoying had been blessed by God. And so he comes near and he kisses him in verse 27, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which Yahweh hath blessed. Let's have a look at Genesis 39 and verse 5. Joseph, in verse 1, was brought to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites. And verse 3, his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that Yahweh blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Yahweh was upon all that he had, in the house and in the field. This was the answer, brothers and sisters, that Isaac had been hoping for. This is what Isaac had wanted, a proof that God was willing to bless Esau, so that he could do the same. And it's important, brothers and sisters, to recognize the character of the blessing which Isaac wishes to give to Esau. This is not the Abrahamic blessing. This is not the promises to Abraham. That, Isaac was certain, was Jacob's. And so in Genesis 28, that is the blessing which we will see that Isaac gives to Jacob. This is not the promises to Abraham. This is a blessing, brothers and sisters, focused on the things of this life. This is the blessing, brothers and sisters, focused on material provision. Verse 28, therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. Believing that Yahweh has blessed Esau, Isaac goes on to give him a blessing for this life as well. The dew of heaven, brothers and sisters. Just have a look at Deuteronomy chapter 33. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 13. And of Joseph he said, blessed of Yahweh be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew, and for the deep that coucheth beneath, and for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon. And in verse 28 we get the same phrase, Israel then shall dwell in safety alone. The fountain of Jacob shall be upon a land of corn and wine. Also his heavens shall drop down dew. And these brothers and sisters were blessings for Israel, which go forward to the future, go forward to the kingdom, but which are based on the blessings which they would receive in the land as a faithful nation. It's the way it's used in Haggai. If you come and have a look at Haggai in chapter 1. The people in Haggai's day had refused to work. They'd looked around, they'd seen the work that needed to be done, they'd thought, you know what, my house needs some tending as well. The ecclesia might be falling down, but I've got to paint that skirting board sometime, so might as well be now. And God condemns, doesn't commend them, he condemns them because they have turned away from doing his work to doing their own work, because they, brothers and sisters, have the attitude of Esau to the things of God. And so in verse 11, having expected blessings when they returned into the land, God called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the corn, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labour of the hands. And in verse 10 it says, the heaven over you is stayed from dew, and the earth is stayed from her fruit. These, brothers and sisters, were blessings for today that Isaac is giving to the son he believes is Esau. They were today's blessings. They were the blessings of this world and of this life. The fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. The fatness means a fertile place, a place which would produce, a place which would provide. The word comes 7 times in Scripture, and again it speaks of those who have enjoyed present blessings, but who are judged for their lack of faith. Just have a look at Psalm 78 and verse 31. The wrath of God came upon them, it says in verse 31, because, verse 30, they were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them, and slew the fattest, same word as the fatness here, of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel, those brothers and sisters who had greedily taken to them more than was theirs. were slain by God, the fattest of them. Back in Genesis 27, verse 29. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. People serving thee, nations bowing down to thee, being Lord over thy brethren. Just come and have a look at Genesis chapter 33. Because this, of course, is a blessing which is being given to Jacob. And just note how this comes about, how this is. Jacob meets Esau, doesn't he? And Esau gives him a munificent greeting. And Jacob has tried to butter Esau up, for want of a better phrase, by giving him all of these gifts and all of these things which Jacob has acquired in Laban. And Esau says in verse 8, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met, this continual company after company which came to me? And Jacob says, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother, keep that thou hast unto thyself. And Jacob says, nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at thy hand, at my hand. For therefore I have seen thy face, as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee. And so this company, these gifts which Jacob is bringing to Esau, Jacob calls them his blessing, and he urges him, and ultimately Esau says, I'll take them. Because what Esau's interested in is today. And there's quite a bit of wealth wandering around on four legs that Esau could get his hands on. But Jacob calls it a blessing. And Hebrews 7 verse 7 tells us that without contradiction, the less is blessed of the greater. And so Jacob, brothers and sisters, shows himself to be Lord of his brother by blessing him and giving him these gifts. Verse 30 of Genesis 27. It came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was yet scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And he also had made savoury meat, and brought it unto his father, and said to his father, let my father arise, and eat of his son's venison, that thy soul may bless me. And Isaac his father said, who are you? And he said, I'm thy son, thy firstborn Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly. The word, brothers and sisters, means to tremble or to quake in fear. Just come and have a look at Genesis 42. Genesis 42 and verse 28. And one of the brothers, said to his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it's even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God hath done unto us? And if we just skip forward to Exodus and have a look at Exodus in chapter 19, we see the same reaction. And it came to pass on the third day, in the morning, that there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And just note, brothers and sisters, both Genesis 42 and Exodus 19 are reactions to an unexpected act or event attributed to God. The money's back in my sack. What's God doing? Isaac realizes, brothers and sisters, that he has been deceived, that he has blessed the wrong son. He has blessed the different son to the one that he thought. Despite the test which he has devised, despite the means by which he might see if Esau was to be blessed, God has engineered it that Jacob is the blessed son. And Isaac, brothers and sisters, sees the hand of God in this. And so he says at the end of verse 33, I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. Yea, and he shall be blessed. It was of God, brothers and sisters, that this came about. And Isaac, who lived his life in the presence of God, recognizes and accepts the blessing that he so desperately wanted to give to Esau was for Jacob. Just come and have a look at Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11 and verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. In a list, brothers and sisters, of great acts of faith, the Spirit highlights Genesis 27 and Genesis 28 to be Isaac's moment of faith. Because he believed that when God blessed a man, you were blessed. Because he trusted in the provision of God to give what was needed. Because he believed that when he said, your brother will be Lord over you, that it would come to pass. Esau, of course, doesn't take kindly to what's happened. Hebrews tells us that he found no place of repentance, though he sought it bitterly with tears. He wept and he wept and he lifted up his voice, and Isaac would not be moved. The son who he loved, who he desperately wanted to bless, would not be moved from the will of God, which he recognized. And in Genesis 28, Isaac calls Jacob and blesses him, and charges him and says unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee. There was no, brothers and sisters, El Shaddai in Genesis 27. But now, Isaac is going to offer the Abrahamic promises to Jacob. Make thee fruitful and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham. The land of thy sojournings. The very last thing, brothers and sisters, that Isaac says is a recognition that he has lived in a land which wasn't his, that he has lived in the presence of God in a land which is not his, but which he says at the end of verse 4, God gave unto Abraham. Isaac believed, brothers and sisters, that when God promised something, he would perform it. That when God said to Abraham, you will possess this land, it was as though he already did. God had given it to Abraham, even though Abraham never received it. I want to finish in Galatians chapter 4. Galatians 4 and verse 28. Now we, brethren, brothers and sisters, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. And that means, brothers and sisters, that God has promised to us. But for Isaac, it meant he lived as though that promise had come to pass. It meant he lived as though that promise was there. It was his. It was his life. And brothers and sisters, let us take the lessons from the character of Isaac that we've considered this week, and let us live like that promise is ours.